scopic regime. Now it's going to be difficult and easy. Easy because you're going to have all the text I'm reading. We can agree or not agree. I could have it here hidden and like try to secretly read it. This time I prefer just to show it on the screen. Some people say, Georges, we can't at the same time listen to what you're saying and read the text. Okay, so I'm sorry about that. But I haven't found yet the best way to do a lecture. At least it has one advantage. You can understand my absolutely awful accent in English. That whatever I do remain there and will remain forever. Albrecht Dürer, St. Jerome in his cell. It's interesting. There is a framing of the glass. The glass window is more or less as it was at his time in Germany. So it's a good introduction to what we are, we humans. We could be characterized as animals with windows. In as much as between world and subject, there's always something that mediates. Not so much a medium per se, but something that connects all outside things and us. It is a saint. I want to show that the halo on the top of his head shows us that it is a saint. So everything that happens here is symbolic. We could spend like 15 minutes or read a whole book on Dürer's work. That's not the scope of my lecture. It is to understand how one has, what is a way that brings us from the window, that's the window, to the screens in which we live today. And I hope I will have time and will be able to do that. Of course, as soon as we speak of windows, we think of Alberti's window, who spoke of aperta finestra in Italian, through which the subject, historia, to be painted is seen. And this comparison established the Western way of seeing the world as a picture. It also transformed the actual window, which at the time Alberti was neither square nor perfectly glazed or transparent. Beginning with the Renaissance, the window presents, on the one hand, its utility as a means for lighting, ventilation, insulation, and the like. On the other hand, it is thought as something to look through. The window is an architectural feature that serves both as a useful hygienic device connected to the body's needs and as an optical apparatus, a kind of magnifying glass or a pair of spectacles. We need spectacles. Today our spectacles are in a way, is it here? Yes, hello, darling. It's my iPhone, my little gadget, which I love. The gadget of that time and within the school of Dürer would be the device, in that case the grid that you trace on the window, to help you trace a landscape. So there's an evolution in Alberti's topos, the painting as window, plus Dürer's method of projection that are put together in that engraving. So I find it very interesting. Engraving by Hieronymus Rodler of 1531. The grid on the window creates a diaphragm. So there is a frame, which is the first device maybe, and there is a second device or apparatus, which is the diaphragm. And the diaphragm permits to abstract and to represent the landscape. Alberti is painting as window creates a condition for the modern spectator. One can stare through a window at the view or at the passerby without being seen. The rise of the modern spectator parallels that of an onlooker armed with his gaze. Here, one can refer to all that has been written on the concept of le regard, the gaze. The world seen through the window as painting shows no continuity with the space where the observer stands. Instead of a continuum, there is only distance, which is underlined by the frame. The onlooker's gaze is asymmetrical because he sees without being seen. And as an example, I have this 16th century Dutch engraving in the treatise of Rademan de Vries on sonography with lots of windows. Maybe there was not so many windows at that time in Amsterdam, but I find it interesting. It's hard to have picture from the interior. The interior is like a lesser subject, which is not easily represented during that time. Yet the Albertian window is not merely an aperture toward an exterior. It also defines many opposite sets of spaces. The exterior and the interior, the illuminated and the adumbrated, the visible and the invisible, the manifest and the hidden. The idea of painting as windows frees man from a tyrannical divine gaze, thus becoming the viewer of the world, of a world that has become image. With the hidden comes the possibility of the intimate, a term derived from the Latin intimus, the superlative of interior, which describes what is hidden from the other's gaze. So the interior is already a comparative in grammar, and the intimus is a superlative. But they all belong to the inside. So you go from the inside to the interior as a comparative, and to the intimus in Latin as a superlative. So the intimus is like the Holy Ghost. I mean, it is the interior of the interior. It is more interior than anything else. And it is where sometimes intimate thing can happen. And it is also where you are not allowed to look. Discretion is asked for. And that's where the idea of privacy is introduced. But privacy, if one goes into a history of privacy, one discovers that it is purely, it is defined by the law. So it's a question of what is private and what is public. It is founded on prohibition and advice. It is forbidden to look or to peep, and please be discreet. Indiscretion determines a highly mutable territory, one that is difficult to map. Now I have just those two images. This one I like, and I've put in my book because it shows the light going through a lens. It's a plate from Athanasiuskirche, the great Jesuit organizing of the museum in Rome. He's one of the first to describe how camera obscura works. And he's interested here in the projection of divine sentences. So there's a kind of alliance that is made between the Jesuit system of propaganda, which, as you probably know, was very efficient, and an optical device that goes through the frame. So that's a good, I think that's a good example of an optical apparatus. The other example I show is the camera obscura in Mario Bettini's Apiaria Universi Philosophiae Mathematicae. Excuse for my pronunciation in Latin. In Bologna, published in Bologna in 1642. And I like this image because here we have, well, what is Mario Bettini's? Bettini was another Jesuit. Like in Nouvelle France, everything belonged to the Jesuit at the time. It's a treatise of mathematics, an interesting one. And here we have a projection through a hole on the screen. In a volume published by another Jesuit, Bettini's, Apiaria Universi Philosophiae Mathematicae, an entire room is made of a camera obscura. Light is brought through small apertures in a covered window to project images on the surface of the opposing wall, which becomes a screen. So I won't say it's the first time, but here we have already a screen. We don't have to wait for our screens to cinema or something like that. We have already the concept of a screen in 1642. The window has been essentially blinded, which allows a counterfeit virtual spectacle to appear. Light is brought through small apertures in a covered window to project images on the surface of the opposing wall, which becomes a screen. The window has been essentially blinded, which allows a counterfeit virtual spectacle to appear. Now my next image is this one, and then we will comment it. It's a plate published by Cornelius Gall in a book by Jean David, Veridicus Christianus, published in Antwerp in 1601. And I like very much, you see there is a man, he has some kind of windows, nose, etc. The original lemma in Latin reads ad spectus incounti dispendium, which more or less means looking thus armed to the careless person. So it is about looking, about discretion and indiscretion. And it is a plate, we could call it a book of catechism. It's about the truthness in the Catholic Church. Anvers was a Catholic church. Every gaze is potentially indiscreet, but when it penetrates domestic interiors, it becomes intrusive, a violation, even a rape. For a Christian, to let the gaze enter a house is correspondent to an act of violence. To stare is like opening up the house as it were a body, letting corruption cross a threshold and threaten the soul inside, to which only a divine power has access. The danger of indiscretion are illustrated by this play, which I just described previously, in which a house appears in the shape of a human head. The harmful gaze might infiltrate this house through the mouth, the door, the nostrils, a ventilation porthole, and the ears and the eyes, windows. As it is customary in Baroque emblems, on the top of the engraved image, a lemma or maxim is inscribed, warning the reader, looking thus armed to the careless person. With the body of the house threatened by indiscreet, sinful gazes, priests and moralists of all confession are called in to protect the domestic space with all its gaping orifices, including the feminine sex. Beneath the same image of Gall, an epigram is inscribed in Latin, Old Dutch, and Archaic French, once more advising the reader that the indiscreet praying gaze can lead to eternal death. Yeah. Framing the gaze. Okay, a window is useful. Here we have a Rembrandt show you how to use a window in 17th century. Illumination, ventilation. But windows appear also in treatises as if they were part of the orders of architecture, Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, etc. And in that case, they become totally abstract. They're not windows to look at, to look through. They're not optical devices anymore. And they are nearly blind in a way. So this has puzzled me for a while. While the window always performs through a double nature, the architectural aspect of the window is based on a need for light and air, although it does not exclude optical use. It seems, however, that except for military defense purpose, the optical use of windows was not part of architectural theory and practice. The psychoanalyst Wajman maintains that the architectural window is blind and that the gaze is not the principal object of architecture but of painting. Gaze therefore implies voyeurism and all its vagaries. Now, let's look at this plate. It is a hôtel particulier, an aristocratic mansion in Paris, Hôtel de la Vrière, built by François Mansart, a good architect, from 1635 to 1650, engraving by Jean Marot. Yeah. I think the windows are like blind. So it's an interesting question. Because architecture belongs to a regime of luxury that exposes itself in order to impose an order on society, both visual, aesthetic, and rational, technical, buildings are defined through their exterior surface. One speaks of the facade, or even the face of a building, which is defined by André Philibien as the sign turned frontward, through which one enters, or a considerable part of what presents itself to anyone who is looking at it. Since architecture, well, it applies quite well to this engraving. Since architecture refers to the image of human body, it would be more precise to allude to the visage. However, it would be a visage devoid of gaze. One can really, if ever, say that architecture gazes back. Without eyes that look, facades pierced by rows of windows and the like are like a visage without a gaze. That is, the architecture window is blind. Of course, you might find this a little too paradoxical, but bear with me. Of course, one could always look through the window. Nevertheless, one shouldn't distinguish between an optical window and an architectural one. Attempt to parse the two distinct scopic regimes and understand their dissimilarities. During the classical and modern periods, the architectural window often resembled the blind face of power. Framing the frame. The frame helps define an image. We see many examples of that before. Dürer, after Dürer, Alberti, etc. But what about the window frame? And what about the door frame itself? A priori, a door is not a visual device, but it can be invested visually. The gaze goes from one interior to another interior. The doorway focuses on the domestic space. In the Dutch painting of the 17th century, there was a genre of painting built around the notion of looking through a door. In Dutch, het door kijken. Sorry, Dutch is so hard. Any Dutch in the room? Doorkijken. Doorkijken. You have to twist your mouth. And one of my preferred paintings of that period is Samuel van Hoogstraten. Sorry if anybody is Dutch. A view into the domestic interior, which is kept at the Louvre. You have the date here. And it's a really interesting picture, since there are many frames. The first frame, which is the doorway, with a handle and a latch. Very dark, but you see it. The second frame, you see the door with keys hanging. And then we go toward an interior. So it's an interior of an interior to an interior. It's an interior at the third level. But that's not enough. Because on the wall, on the back, hanging on the wall on the back, we have a picture of an interior. So this is, if that is not a mise en abîme, what is a mise en abîme? And the painting hanging is with a dark frame itself and showing with an interior view. Can you see it? I mean, is it okay? The definitions again. One could do a whole series of interior. One of my preferred, but I won't stop too much, is Willem Hammershøi, the Danish painter, Dust Mold Dancing in the Sunlight of 1900, which is kept in private collection in Copenhagen. But there are many other Hammershøi in the Fine Art Museum in Copenhagen, similar to this one. Speaking of frames, I like very much Joseph Albert's Windows of 1929, where there's a play of perspective. You know, what is in front, what is in back, what is small, what is big. So optical illusion, in a way. Or René Magritte's In Praise of Dialectics of 1936, which is framing the frame. Now, framing the frame is, or making a hyperframe, is made by my sort of fetish preferred picture, tableau. A German tableau by Johann Hermann Hummel. You have the dates here. It's the Berlin Zimmer. No date, around 1820-25. Ladies, at least 5 ladies. There's a young one playing on the harpsichord. Windows, mirrors, reflection. In the view entitled Berliner Zimmer, a 1925 watercolor of a Berlin room. In fact, by the way, a Berlin room exists. I mean, if you do some history in the Berlin during the 19th century, there is something called the Berlin room. But that's not my point. I'm just interested in this picture. In the view entitled Berliner Zimmer, the 1825 watercolor by Hummel, mirrors and windows take on the same luminosity and chromatic weight, becoming the same kind of object within this painterly representation. The pictorial treatment transformed the windows into mirrors, and the mirrors, which in the pictorial fiction reproduce the interior scene from diverse perspectives, becomes windows, both by means of their infinite reflections and their literal reflection of the division between the interior and the world of things outside the windows, which is almost excluded. Washed out by the veiling of the surface reflection of the glass. The large room is like a box, and the viewer is situated on one side of its side. The mirror centered between the two windows, I'm speaking of this window, this mirror. The mirror centered between the two windows reflects a closed door on the opposite wall, the wall where the observer or the painter should appear, but he doesn't appear. But the observer is absent. The viewer of the painting looks into a room which looks back at him through a mirror, but he is not present. Because he is not represented within the room, it is as if the subject has become part of the room. The manifold reflections which occur within the room, the manifold reflections which occur in the room, meaning not only the reflection along the central axis, which emphasizes the general symmetry of its box-like aspect, but also the reflections which occur between different mirrors emphasize a self-contained and self-referential interiority. In the windows, if the windows have become mirrors, then perhaps the exterior is a total illusion, and there is no outside world. Here, then, the outside world is only a kind of representation. Let's have a look at the outside world. One can distinguish on the left, maybe the apside of a church. There's some life in the street, but it's completely, it is not the main subject, of course. Both the painted Berlin room, nearly cubic like a biscuit tin, or the 5 female figures seated within it, are ruled by the principle of mirroring and doubling. From Prinzip der Spiegelungen und Verdoppelung, existing only within this Innerlichkeit, this inwardness. By the way, Innerlichkeit was a category of being inside something, in interior, developed by all the romantic, German romantic painters, including Hummel, but also poets, writers like Jean-Paul, etc. So I think this painting, I insisted on this painting because I think it represents very well the quality which the German word Innerlichkeit describes, this inwardness that appears in this painting. Of course, one could multiply the various examples, go through Adolf von Menzel's balcony room of 1845. There was a genre, by the way, here, also in Germany. It was called the Zimmerbild, or chamber painting. A genre that developed in Berlin during the Biedermeier period. During the first half of the 19th century, the expression world of private life assumed its legal and social aspect. The French term intérieur no longer referred to the interiority of the human heart or soul, but to what, in its midst, guaranteed the condition for happiness and comfort. And sometimes you had to protect yourself from the source of your wealth. Here the lady has put some glasses, getting rid of all the disagreeable views from your window. It's an advertisement by a British company of 1890, which is a kind of paradox, because in the same time she needs to separate from self, from the view of what actually furnishes her wealth. So there's a kind of contradiction between the source of her wealth and the window hiding her wealth. As the home became the place of conflicting passion, it emerged as a fortress of English privacy or German Gemütlichkeit, while conversely also becoming a microcosm crisscrossed by mobile borders. In domestic space, the public and the private engage in confrontation, a state of warfare. And of course, the new technology will be part of this. This is an invented video telephone, dreamed of in Paris in 1900, en l'an 2000. Nevertheless, before long, the new media of communications, books, newspaper, magazines, moved into the domestic space, and the tendrils of a planetary knowledge penetrated those sedate rooms, even before the spread of technology such as telephone or electricity. The dividing line between public and private spheres formed an active battleground, one that was constantly shifting and readjusting as society's norms changed and evolved. For example, the telephone was perceived as an unbearable infringement by some. Walter Benjamin recalls that in his house, the arrival of the telephone around between 1900 and 1910 was a sort of a family drama. Some people being for, or some people being against. And isn't it, what is the British serial? Downton Abbey, is it? There is a huge battle about technology. The radio, not the radio, telephone, not the telephone. Mobius effect. Whether one, how long do I have? Hmm?
Another 10, 15.
Go for it. Whether one is concerned with the visual, the acoustic, or the digital, it is possible to draw a chart of our sonic environment. This would radically relocate the Windows eye issue from a public-private question to the realm of the auditory. However, our digital world is audiovisual, and the two perceptive domains are blurred. Film, telephony, phonography, television, and the interface with computer screens are all connected psychotechnical practices. Nomadic devices offering portable audio-video capabilities help remap the limits of the public and the private. The nomadic contrivances of our life are selectively alive today, stretching the contours of our egotistic spheres. As such, these pervasive portable devices deeply transform our way of life. As a conclusion, I propose three paradigms plus one. Just to describe the situation we are in today. The three paradigms are labeled under the headings defined by the work of three major 20th century thinkers: Benjamin, Foucault, and Deleuze. The three paradigms consist respectively in the prosthetic devices, in the control regime, and the nomadic flow. None of them have a chronological existence or explanation, nor do they show any significant diachronic logic. Simply, they coexist in our post-utopian society. The first device, maybe the one you know better, Walter Benjamin prosthetics. First with Benjamin comes to grips. First with Benjamin, one comes to grips with the theory of the apparatus or equipment for and cinema, which exposes how the cameraman puts himself in the position of a surgeon, inasmuch as both operators implement practices that are conceptually close to the nature of the prosthetic equipment. And one of the favorite examples of Walter Benjamin is Dziga Vertov, Man with a Movie Camera of 1929, which of course now is a classic, but another example that of course Walter Benjamin couldn't know would be a Rear Window, Alfred Hitchcock's film, with Jimmy Stewart legs holding a cast and putting all his energy in the camera. He's wheelchair bound, his leg immobilized by a plaster cast and thus unable to respond to his girlfriend's desire, Grace Kelly. He used potent telephoto lenses to observe the lives of his neighbors. Here the subject is reduced to his own eye, enhanced by prosthesis. His energy is encapsulated in scopic pulsions. A more recent example would be Hiro Iwata, who teaches computer science and engineering in Japan. His floating eye. The apparatus offers an illustration of such prosthetic extension. You don't see anything, you are blind, but you have a balloon hanging on the top of you with a video camera. Cool. Dangerous, but cool. Foucault's theory of the device and control regime. In the second place, Foucault's theory of device, dispositif, used Jeremy Bentham panopticon as his acme and investigates the rules of vision and the regimes of virtuality of various heterotopias, ultimately confronting one with an archaeology of the optical window. Here we find again the optical window. It comes back at that point, which permits the articulation of two heterogeneous series, that of knowledge, savoir, in the social sciences, and that of power, pouvoir. Recently, Giorgio Agamben has published a book titled in English, What is an Apparatus? He demonstrated that the concept of device or apparatus belongs to the field of economy in the Aristotelian sense, one that was appropriated by early Catholicism and scholasticism. For Agamben, any apparatus, including a confession, penance, prison, or even cell phones, leads to a process of inexorable subjugation. Apparatus is, first of all, a machine that produces subjectification, and only as such, it is also a machine of governance. So I sort of agree only half with Agamben. On one side, we've all been shocked when we discovered that there is an American institution that can listen to all your calls. I mean, our calls have absolutely no importance, but so maybe dear Giorgio Agamben has a point. where I don't agree with him, that he hates his cell phone, and I love my cell phone. On this, maybe it's like the idea of the optimist and the pessimist. I mean, the bottle is half full of half empty. And see Deleuze and Guattari nomadic smooth spaces. Third, the concept of desiring machine and nomadic disposition are defined by Deleuze with Félix Guattari, his famous chapter 12 of a Thousand Plateaux. Nomadic subjects are free to roam across the unstriated, smooth spaces where no a prioristic artificial limits or barriers have been plotted on the land. The liberation of fluxes and flows in movement permits one to exit the old landscape and open up a new territory wherein old subjectivities collapse. Moreover, can't pronounce that. Moreover, the nomadic reality offers a high-speed condition, even if one remains motionless. For Deleuze, nomads are always in the middle. They have neither past nor future. They have only becomings. Nomads have no history. They can only have geography. And of course, all what Deleuze and Guattari says applies so well to the American continent, which are very little history, but a lot of geography. Any emphasis on temporality has switched into a spatial issues, while a planetary awareness has expanded, becoming topographical, and with the rise of networks, even topological. Nomads. Perhaps the best example would be this Toyo Ito, dwelling for a Tokyo nomad woman, made first in Tokyo in '85. And the lady who is posing, for those who knows, is, what's her name? The founder of Sana. Yeah, it's Sejima, the young Sejima. That's for the gossip. That's the gossip part. Always very useful. Toyo Ito project for an electronic tent in Brussels in '89. Today, new thresholds leads from the era of the intimate to that of the estimate. The relation between intimate and estimate is a quasi-topological nature, a situation in which the interior is turned into an exterior, like in a Mobius strip, a closed, non-orientable surface with only one side and only one boundary. This kind of surface can lead to consideration on networks, the world's tools for a Gattaro-Deleuzian can't pronounce that, deterrite. Awful word. I would have chosen a better one. Or what Pierre Lévy has termed the Mobius effect, much better. He explains that today, only in the realm of the real do things have defined limits. Just another window, a good one. It's a film by the British filmmaker Nicholas Barker from '97, Unmade Beds. I recommend you that bed. Capturing fleeting moments between exhibitionism and voyeurism, artists, photographers, and cinematographers, such as Nicholas Barker, stage in the images the world of an ongoing pan-eroticization. Of course, one has framed, even hyperframe during this whole lecture. We finish with a frame, but then as soon as you speak of cadrage, there is a possibility of décadrage. And Pascal Bonitzer, which is a theorist of cinema that was read by Gilles Deleuze, This is a copy of Laval University, which I scanned, introduce the idea of décadrage. So from the framing to the unframing. Yeah. That's an interesting thing. Maybe it was what Teyssot was doing with the eggs of winds, the town gate for Okawabata River City in Chuoku. The passage from the frame to the screen with video image projected on 5 screens during the night. Levy argues that virtuality is one of 4 modes of existence, along with reality, possibility, and actuality. Virtualization forces one to rethink the classical identity. Virtualization adds to, but does not replace the real, the possible, and the actual. Virtualization is always heterogenesis, becoming other, openness to alterity. Today, processes of virtualization address the 3 different fields of the corporal body, the text, and the environment. And I said 3 models or 3 paradigms plus 1, and the plus 1 would be, for those who know me, Peter Sloterdijk's Spheres, the 3 volumes of the sphere. Here the cover of the French translation of the 3rd volume, but it has come out in English. The English translation is out, no? I'm wrong?
Yes, it's out.
And this will be my conclusion. Is that okay?
Yeah. No problem.
Peter Sloterdijk's Spheres, the 3 volumes, bubbles, globe, foam. The 3 volumes exploration of how to dwell in spaces represent a significant topological turn in contemporary thinking. Topology investigates the fabric of space together with points, regions, neighborhoods, inside and outside limit. And now, if you want me to explain what is topology, this is impossible because it actually takes like 300 pages just to start to explain topology. So we won't do that. But this is this phrase would be the beginning. Topology will help develop Sloterdijk's climatic islands, protected by artificial intelligence, sentient and responsive envelopes. Thank you very much.
The anecdote is of the Windows operating system by Microsoft, how it came to be called Windows, of which I'm familiar. I was a publisher of the manuals for Microsoft Windows. The anecdote goes that the conceptual idea in an LSD rage was that you were looking outside a New York tenement and you would see dozens of windows. And through the operating system, the interface, we would bring the device, the apparatus, we would bring the viewer to get different perspectives on things by opening or entering different windows. Apparently there was an argument that it should be called doors. But during this LSD party, they were listening to the Doors on 33 RPM record. But the anecdote is the Doors, named after a passage in Aldous Huxley, The Doors of Perception, in Aldous Huxley. So the name was taken. So Windows. Sort of the corollary to the story is, why did Windows 8 fail in the age of the cell phone? Because you're no longer looking at an apartment building and entering windows. The cell phone does exactly the opposite. It puts you inside the building looking out. And it's hence the difference between an Apple product and a Microsoft product, and led to the demise of Windows 8 as a total failure commercially, because in effect it was trying to turn the cell phone into its opposite, a device in which you would have to fall into the window. So if you're all using Apple products,
I'm not paid.
reverse the apparatus. So more of an anecdote than a question. There's no response required. It's a rhetorical.
I have a response. I didn't show it because, you know, I agree only 50% with Anne Friedberg, but you know, it's a good work. And she's not an architect, so the architectural part, I think it's a little weak, but the part on cinema is good. And of course, she thinks a lot about windows. So that would be the beginning of an answer.
You're very quick in having the image. Well, I don't know what to do in this room because nobody can be back there, nobody can. In 3 instances, I can think of a complete cultural attitude towards the window. One is the Mr. Lava in Islam, in the world of Islam, which is very strange. It projects out, you can sort of see, you can't see in. Anyway, it could be very interesting in terms of a kind of whole different culture. Then I think of the drawings, very much in the same period that you show, but the windows were always made black. And most of the, okay, why? I don't know. Interesting. And then the third thing.
You mean black, like blind?
Black, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, blind. Yeah. Nothing. Or everything. And,
But,
and
yes.
Mies said that when he was working in Germany, you never designed what the window divisions were. You went out of the site when the building was put up, and you decided there. Okay, those are just 3 interesting tracks to follow.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I don't have an answer for. But I did speak about the blind window, and I was surprised to find in many engravings that the window is actually blind. And I was wondering when I did show Hôtel de la Vrière. Huh?
There are lots of them.
Yeah, lots of them.
Yeah.
One could say today that all the windows are blind because with this new glass material, which are reflexive, and forbids the bad part of light to enter, they look like blind, the modern glass window. But I'm not an expert at glass, so I'm not the right person to answer. But the Mies thing is really interesting, okay? Good.
In your lecture, you addressed the interiority, the inside, that also is outside that can become a spectacle through the window or the screen.
Yes, absolutely. Well, the condition, today's condition of a window today is a screen. And the screen is what permits you to see outside. So you close actually the window, the old style window, and you use your screen to communicate with the outside world. That's how I see it. And just to finish, I call that a topological twist. Meaning you are in an interior, but this interior permits you to communicate actually with the whole world.
What about the glass wall building?
Well, we can discuss the glass wall, but maybe it's meant for people not to look in, first of all, and maybe today also not to look out, because I spoke with people who are planning offices today, and say, well, we don't want windows, because computer screens don't like windows. So basically, you blind the windows. You know, you choose technically how you're going to do it. But you blind the windows, and then you can have your screens. It's a paradox, I agree. I did realize that once I was discussing with an engineer in an old-fashioned way. You know, this building could have nice windows. Oh, we don't need windows anymore in offices.
One second.
But John, don't you think also putting aside the 20th century and the world of virtual, that there would be a history to be made of how the window started to be used as something to look at? So you use Alberti, you know, the idea that the window becomes the frame to look at the world in perspective painting. But it would be an interesting story to think of when windows started to be used mainly as a device to look out, rather than letting light in. Because the Renaissance window is not necessarily to look out, right?
No.
Mainly stained.
But some people say
stained glass.
It's only to frame a painting.
Yeah. So and they're using a stained glass. You don't really see outside. The glass is not very transparent anyway. So it would be an interesting history to be made when the windows started to be conceived as mainly something that, or primary as something or maybe not primarily, but something as well as we use to look out, so that they become really optical devices.
Well, I would say that the first example would be the military architecture that you know so well through Viollet-le-Duc. I mean, at that time, you know, windows were military devices. You had to see the enemy, you had to shoot. During the Renaissance, it becomes more complicated.
And probably linked to the development of landscape painting.
Yes, also. That's why I like the grid that is put on the window. That becomes a diagram in this pupil of Dürer.
You were saying that we don't need the windows in the office building. But I spent a few years in the famous IBM Yorktown Heights laboratory, where you have this glass wall on the outside, but everyone's office was on the interior, and all you saw was shadows moving past. And what would happen was that at 4 o'clock every afternoon, everyone would rush out of his office and go to the window to see what the world was like. And this was all spontaneous, that everyone had this physiological reaction.
Yeah, I know this building.
Yeah, I'm sure you do, yeah.
Saarinen.
Saarinen, yes.
I think it's a good building.
Yes.
Because the engineer said, we don't want light, so we need labs without windows. That was a part of the brief.
Well, it's a beautiful building, but in fact, I mean, one of the things that happens is that the people, when it was designed, the idea was you were going to keep people from gossiping. But it turned out that in a scientific laboratory, gossip is extremely valuable. So it didn't work that well after all.
Well, they did create a small space between the glass and the lab. There are small space for discussion on the blackboard.
Yes.
But it's a wonderful building. I love it. And Saarinen is a genius. So you were in the industry?
I was a scientist at the laboratory. My first job.
My compliments.
Quand vous avez parlé de l'aspect militaire des fenêtres, est-ce qu'on n'appelle pas ça une meurtrière?
Oui, oui.
Est-ce que c'est pas... Et quelle est la différence entre une fenêtre avec un verre et un open window?
Qu'est-ce que c'est une open window?
C'est-à-dire une meurtrière,
Oui.
elle n'avait certainement pas un panneau de veille.
Non, non.
Alors, comment, dans cette notion de défense militaire, cette notion de fenêtre, quelle est la différence entre une fenêtre plombée, que j'appellerais une fenêtre, vous avez une petite fenêtre, et la meurtrière, la petite pour le fusil ou la flèche?
Dans l'architecture militaire, elle s'appelle meurtrière parce que c'est pour commettre un meurtre. Donc c'est pour tuer l'ennemi.
Oui.
Après, ça devient plus difficile. À partir d'Alberti, la Renaissance et tout, la fenêtre a plusieurs fonctions, parfois optiques, parfois purement pour illuminer l'intérieur ou l'aérer. Et puis, quand on arrive au modernisme, ça se complique un peu, parce que certaines fenêtres sont de brutales ouvertures. Elles ne sont pas faites pour tuer. Et on peut se demander si c'est pour voir et y voir quoi. Et là, il faudrait voir quels exemples historiques vous citez. Par exemple, si on prend la fameuse maison de Terrani, la Villa Malaparte, il y a tout un jeu de fenêtres extraordinaire qui encadre la vue. Donc il faudra y aller en fait au cas par cas. Certaines fenêtres servent à encadrer la vue, certaines fenêtres servent à apporter la lumière.
En fait, la fenêtre...
Et dans l'architecture moderne, je suis sûr qu'on a moderne ou moderniste, je vais passer l'expression tout à fait peu précise, je pense qu'on peut trouver tous les cas et faire une analyse intéressante. D'ailleurs, c'est ce que Phyllis disait par rapport à Miss. Mais oui, allez-y.
Est-ce que la fenêtre moderne militaire est justement devenue l'ordinateur? Parce que quand on voit les drones et tout ça, puis nous montrer la télé qui claque, qui pouvait une tape dedans,
Oui.
c'est ça la nouvelle fenêtre militaire.
Là, vous avez raison. Tout à fait. Alors, comment s'appelle le film, hein? 0.1 où il tue dans l'obscurité avec Chastain, comment elle s'appelle l'actrice? Bon.
I'm wondering if there's also a temporal dimension to the shifts in the tradition of the windows. I'm thinking of this one drawing by Michelangelo, but I can't remember which church it is in Rome, but he had drawn eyes where there would be windows in the ceiling of the church. But obviously the eyes there are something we touched on where it's this God's vision, the light, but it's also atemporal. So I'm just wondering in the shift of where the observer is positioned, or whether we're inside looking out or outside looking in, there's this notion of time. I know you emphasize space, but what about time in the history of the window?
Time, like what? I'm sorry.
Well, I think also from the, in a way like whether it's the embodied or disembodied experience. So for example, there's that shift where you say with Alberti that somehow it's a window that something we can own this view and construct it. And in some ways that view was the divine perception until then that can be constructed. And I don't know if there's also a way of tracing how then that sort of atemporal view is in some ways also. I think it is obviously like whether it's an instantaneity or the frame by frame of the frozen moment. I don't know if this is something that we can also see when we look at the history of the window that you described. Or maybe it's just...
I don't know.
No.
I'll think about it. Oops.
We have one. Yes.
One more.
And then we stop.
I wonder if we could add an ecological point of view. You know that in nature the different natural zones, for example, a wood and a river, they are connected through a specific thin space, linear thin space called icotonal, what's the English? In Italian is spazio icotonale. So they are icotonal.
I have no
It should be icotonal. It's a sort of, it's a space in between, sharing the characteristics of the two zones, but very thin. And you know, animals, they recognize the icotonal space, and they use icotonal space for moving. So, and it's in a space in between, sharing the characteristics, and it's very rich by the point of view of biodiversity, because it has both characteristics of the different zones. So don't you think that in the facades with windows we have a sort of icotonal space for man that is recreating his environment?
Icotonal space for, I don't understand the last word.
For the human being, for us, like
Yeah.
in nature, like,
Yes.
like what happens for anyone in nature.
The answer is yes.
Yes, okay. Thank you.